eagle eye. But guilt doesn't help us. You know, whether you're talking about Native history or people with disabilities, if we're having a new conversation, if we're moving forward with a client or as a movement, we don't need to feel guilty. Nobody in this room worked at an institution. No one in this room put my brothers and sisters in Middleborough. But there are people in this room that can move us forward and move us past Middleborough into communities. So those people that you saw in diapers rocking on the floor are now employed in the community. And that's the conversation that we're here to have. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 1987. And again, this is not a history I know, but this is how history impacted my life as I grew up. So in 1987, I turned 5 years old. And much like my older sisters, my parents were like, awesome. We're going to get rid of Mike for half a day. we're going to enroll him in kindergarten. And they knew because I had a disability, I was born with my disability, that I would need additional support. So they took me to the administrator that summer before to set up some accommodations. And my parents walked in, I walked into this meeting, and the administrator took one look at me and said, no. He doesn't belong here. He belongs in a school for people like him, where you need to just keep him at home. Basically telling my parents, you know what? Keep him comfortable, because he's not doing well tomorrow. And my mom's a special ed teacher, or a Title I teacher, retired last year. But when she tells me this story, because I don't really remember it, she never ends with her getting upset, which I always thought was weird. I was like, I would have really got mad. I would start yelling at people. I've since found out that my mother is in fact a quarter Jedi. So she didn't have to yell. She just looked at this guy and said, Michael is going to your school. He went back and said, Michael is coming to my school. But again, the reason that he had that attitude, that he said those things, was because of that history. Because he didn't have experience with people with disabilities, much less his parents or his grandparents. So seeing me walk through his office was a very, very new experience for him. So again, I didn't know that, but it plays a part in the history. It played a part every day I went to school, because we have to label people. You have to label people. This is the society we live in. So one of the first labels I ever got was special ed. Just right across my forehead. And it didn't really affect me, but it affected the way people interacted with me. I remember, you remember like grade school? Grade school, you get a new teacher every day, or every year. You show up with your new shoes and your trapper keeper. And okay, if you laugh at trapper keeper, your 90s is showing. I don't have those anymore. Space age Velcro that was loud as hell. But we meet our new teacher every year, and they walk up and they say to every other kid, hello, nice to meet you, let's have a great year. It's, again and again I see this interaction. And I was expecting that, but that's not what I got. What I got was, hello! How are you doing? And when I was 5 years old, I was like, why are you yelling at me? So the only thing I could assume was that all of my teachers had disabilities. I just looked at them with my big brown eyes. I'm okay. How are you? I was a junior before we figured out either one of us thought like that. IEP meetings took forever. Great medical IEP meeting, individualized education plan. Like I mentioned yesterday when I'm reading all these announcements and cards, I'm mildly dyslexic as well. I have a reading disability. So I showed up at my first IEP meeting when I was a freshman, honestly expecting pie. That sounds fantastic. I've been doing this every year. But I remember being in school and this idea. I think one of the worst things we ever did was title something special in regards to people with disabilities. Because you'll never, raise your hand if you work at a very special center for vocational rehabilitation. No, there's no very special independent living center. When it comes to the programs and services we use as adults that we control and have input in, that word never appears unless you do something very special. It's not just a title that's given. And I think a lot of where we go wrong is in education, and it carries out throughout life, is every kid is special. And you don't have nieces and nephews and sons and daughters. If they're under the age of 5, they're all special. Every time they take a shit, it's special. I know, I see the pictures on Facebook. But then all of a sudden they turn 5, and if an adult even mentions the word, your kid might be shut up. No, my kid's ordinary. Don't say my kid's special. And what we don't do is we don't talk to kids. We don't explain to them why all of a sudden the person that lived next door to them is special and I'm not. All they know is what's fair and unfair. So when they go to school and say, well, there's special education and you're regular education, all the other kids are like, wait a second, that's not fair. They're getting some, I'm not. I was special. We were both special yesterday. We never have that conversation with students to say it's not special. It's that they do something in a different way. Same game. They're just using different tools. We never have that. We don't give young people the credit to have that conversation with them. So I remember in school being very much a fan, or a student of people rather than subjects. Because every student with a disability wants to be normal. You carry that lunch tray in. I never found the table for adopted Native Americans with 4 fingers. That club doesn't exist. I tried to start one once. We had a lunch meeting. The janitor showed up. You're not adopted. But I remember and this idea, and this is something you guys deal with all the time, appropriate accommodation versus inappropriate accommodation. I was offered a lot of inappropriate accommodations as a kid. I remember we talked about transition, that awkward transition from picture books to chapter books. Terrifying. When you heard about it from the class ahead of you, you're like, oh, forget it. There's no more juice boxes, there's no more sitting in circles, you're expected to read chapters and turn in reports. And we're like, what is a report? And I remember the day, we got our first assignment, and the teacher said, all right, everybody read a 300-page book, or something like that, and no pictures. And we all freaked out. And collectively, as a class, we're like, the world is ending. But I was immediately put at ease, because my teacher took me aside and said, Michael, you're special. I know. Said, you don't worry about the 200 pages or whatever. You just hand something in. I said, cool. I turned in the best book of my life a couple weeks later on Where's Waldo? It had one sentence, I found you. And the worst part of that story is I got a B. And that's again when my mother had to step in and say, no, that's not an appropriate accommodation. Michael, unless you offer Mike a salary when he graduates, finding a skinny dude in stripes. needs to be learning math and science and reading and everything his peers are doing.